This is Science Friday. I'm Ira Flato. If you take a walk through your city or town, you probably take in what's going on around you, right? The big buildings, the parks, the patches of green space, the people buzzing around. But my next guest says to really decode the history and what really is going on in the city, you need to look at these smaller, almost invisible details, like the manhole covers, the cryptic markings on the pavement where to dig and, well, where not to dig. Lots more. So, here to talk about some of these unseen clues built right into our cities and how those environments adapt to change. Roman Mars, host of the 99% Invisible podcast, co author of the book, The 99% Invisible City, a field guide to the hidden world of everyday design. Roman, welcome to Science Friday.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you. Just a reminder that this conversation is being recorded in front of a live Zoom audience, and we want to hear your questions. We want to know from you, what hidden parts of your city have you discovered that you think people have overlooked? Or has there been a detail or a feature of your city that you've noticed and wondered why it was there? You can give us a little bit of what you think in our live Zoom audience, and we will try to answer some of those questions, as many as we can get to in our conversation. So let me begin with you, Roman, and ask you: is in your podcast and your book, you unearth all these little unseen details. Why are you so interested in cities?
Well, I like cities because what brings us together. So I use the built world as a lens to talk about who we are as people and what our values are and what we're sort of prioritizing at a given moment. And a city is this kind of partly designed, partly kludgy ad hoc collection of all the things that we do and value when we're trying to live together. And in that sense, it's a really good artifact to talk about who we are as humans.
Do you remember David McCauley's The Way Things Work books? Were you
Oh,
influenced
oh
by
yeah.
them at all? Yeah, they
Totally.
were terrific, right?
That and connections and all these sorts of things. I love all that stuff. I was like raised on that, which is sure that's why I am the way I am.
Do people find you staring at things in the city as you walk around looking and saying, what is that guy doing?
Yeah, especially I like sidewalk stamps a lot, which are often like contractor stamps or little placards that tell you, like that about an easement of some kind. I like to crouch down and take pictures of those. And I'm a big plaque reader. I'm a big believer in reading plaques, even if plaques are not always telling you the best story or the accurate story. I still think it's important to read as many as you can.
Well, tell me about a little bit about your history. Before 99% Invisible, you were in school to become a scientist. You were studying population genetics.
Yeah,
Does your
yeah.
science background help you decode all these things that you're looking at?
I think that the same brain that made me interested in science to understand the hidden processes at work made me love genetics, and it also makes me love design and thinking about these things. I mean, there's a different force at work, different types of intent at work, but I still like to use the critical eye of science to explain things and also to think about I often use and think about metaphors of an ecosystem when I think and talk about cities. It really is a complex ecosystem with some adaptive parts and some non-adaptive parts and vestigial like organs that are sitting out there and all kinds of things. And it is a really good metaphor to explain cities.
Well, let's get into some of these details because I found your book extremely fascinating. It
Oh,
spoke
thank
to
you.
me as another geeky person who likes to look at cities. For example, you look at the Holland Tunnel. For those of us in New York, we try to speed through it as fast as we can. But you looked at the ventilation system. And in fact, look, because I've looked at these over the years, the facade of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel air shaft in Brooklyn is used as the headquarters of the film Men in Black. I
Yeah.
remember when I saw that, I said, wait a minute, I've seen that in real life. Does that kind of stuff really turn you on like it does for me?
It totally does. Seeing it being used and this what I love about that in particular was how much effort at that time period was to make this piece of very functional infrastructure into something that was striking, in and of itself is something that represents how we were thinking of infrastructure at the time. Whereas I think that today, an equivalent structure would be pretty utilitarian and would never serve as the headquarters of Men in Black, you know? And that's one of the things I love to sort of mark, you know, one of the ways that you can sort of mark how in our architecture is how we feel about government at different times. And you know, like there was a period of time when all these state capitals went up in the early 20th century, and they have domes and they have gold on them, and they're these busy filigree, and they're in the Beaux-Arts style. And then later on, you see them as being very functional, very modernist, very square, and there was no waste, and there was no notion that you had to put on a ton of gilded edges to represent us, to say that government represents the best of us. And it's no, you have to save money. And so I love these little moments, and those structures being so grand and so interesting tells you something about what they thought of the Holland Tunnel at the time, was that it was like an amazing achievement, and it should be reflected in the architecture that it is an amazing achievement. And that's what I like about that story.
Let's go to our first listener question. Steve Lovell, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Steve in Seattle. Hi, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Ira. I was kind of curious. In Seattle, I see these little gargoyles on buildings in the downtown area of Seattle, but not all across the city. And was this common in cities? And was there a time period when this was popular?
Great question, because we have a lot of them here in New York too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. There was definitely a time period where, you know, like where we had, like when I mentioned sort of the Beaux-Arts style, like to have a lot of busy um, uh, detail that's architectural, was definitely, it's definitely, we've passed that point, you know. Because what's I think the most amazing thing about gargoyles in particular, especially historic ones, as part of the water system of gutters, is that they're often really hard to see, you know. Like they're not made to be seen. They're kind of they it's odd that you would put so much effort into something that so few people could notice. I have a feeling that the ones that are more recent in places like Seattle and New York, are lower. They're more meant to be seen. They're more meant to be enjoyed, and they have the benefit of sort of like being there for the populace versus being there for the architect and builder, is what sort of more in the Paris style. But I don't know the specific details, but they are amazing, and I think that's one of those things that when you see that type of detail put into a building, you can feel the care, and I like the way that it speaks to you when you see them.
Yeah, if you want to see gargoyles, just pull out Ghostbusters and you'll see them climbing around. Was it the Chrysler Building, which is a wonderful gargoyles all over it. But let's talk about another city. You say in your book the most interesting traffic light is in Syracuse, New
New York.
York. Tell
Yeah.
us about that.
Well, in the early days of traffic signals like that, it wasn't really codified as to like what the order of traffic lights would be. That the red is on top of the yellow, which is on top of the green. And when it was put in Syracuse, New York, in a very Irish neighborhood, the citizenry of that neighborhood was very upset of Unionist red being put on top of Republic green, and so they threw rocks at it, and they knocked it out until it was reversed, and they put the green on top of the red, and it went kind of back and forth, where people were really wringing their hands a lot as to whether or not this was a problem, and it was getting standardized in places. And finally, the city kind of relented, and to this day, the green is on top of the red in Syracuse, New York, and there's a monument beside it that tells the history. And I think of that as the most interesting traffic light in the world, for that reason, because it's one of those things that you think of something that has no value, or is innocuous, and but it meant so much to that, you know, group of people who live there, that they could not abide the red over the green. So the green is over the red to this day.
I want to talk about something I once asked Jimmy Breslin, who was a famous New York City columnist.
Yeah.
And we were talking about cities and what makes them work, because you talk a lot about what makes things work in the city. And he said, you know, the one thing that makes cities like New York, London, Moscow, Paris, that is absolutely necessary for the city to work is the subway system, the metro, whatever you call it in that city. I
Mhm.
was a little bit surprised to see that you did not really mention a whole bunch of stuff, or very much about the subway system.
Yeah, I mean, well, it has a little bit to do with the fact that There's a few cities in which that is the key, you know, and it's really the center of how the city functions. But you mentioned them, and there's kind of a handful of them, and a lot of the times, like we kind of wanted this city guide to be, it's almost like a tongue-in-cheek title, like we were like, oh, you're going to a city, here's the guide to the city, like any city. And in a lot of places, that isn't the cornerstone of how the city functions. And yeah, we, you know, we have some stuff about underground travel and stuff like that, but yeah, it was just one of those ones that
Yeah.
that sort of never rose above, because we wanted to make sure that kind of, I think I kind of conceived of it as a person walking around, the things that they would encounter,
Yeah.
mostly in the city. And so
A lot of good tile work underground.
and there's beautiful tile work.
You could do a whole book just on subways. I'm
I
sure there are
think
plenty
no,
of them,
for
right?
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Like it's like a beautiful system. It's one I envy. But yeah, it's not a big central point
Yeah.
of the book.
All right. Another listener question, Kyle. I hope I got that right. Kyle Hazard in Marin County, California, talking about survey markers. That's really interesting. Hi, welcome to Science Friday. Kyle, did I get it right? Well, sometimes these these link ups take time. Well, hidden part of the city was the question. Survey markers. You did mention those in your book about how there are markers all over the cities. What do the markers do?
Yeah, well, a lot of the times the markers are for there was this sort of obsession for a long time to figure out the center of cities. And when you plumb this to, you know, like you find that there's not a ton of reason to find that out. You know, like they're more like a thing that we feel rather than a thing that's actually has a great deal of function. But for some reason, like the zero stone, there was a lot of effort to find the center of San Francisco, and and I think it's easy um, to like to see what the problem is when you look at something like San Francisco. It has tons of landfill around it. At certain points, like the center of the city was lots of different things, and how far off the coast do you count it, and all sorts of things like this. And they often try to put a commemorative stone there or a marker there to indicate what it is, and it serves as a center. But I think what we those types of things, those like ceremonial markers that sort of represent sort of geography in some way, they just give us some kind of grounding, and they there's a reason why they're there, but it has little to do with you know, like real purpose.
You did mention in the book that sometimes markers are put to show people that this is private property. We're letting you use it. It's like on the sidewalk,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So there are these easement markers that you can find in sidewalks, and they're embedded, and they usually say like this space is not dedicated, which basically means that it's like the property line of a building is often extends past the building and into the sidewalk, but the sidewalk is there for the building to function, for the city to function, for all kinds of things. But they put that little you know, placard, you know, embedded into the sidewalk just as just a reminder. And you do kind of need this as a reminder, because
Yeah.
there is sort of this thing called adverse possession. That means if like if you can occupy a space for long enough, you can control it. But it's a marker there to let people know that we will allow you to use this piece of sidewalk for now, but just so you know, this is ours. And so
Mm.
we'll let you pass over it, and that's what those easement markers are for.
One of my favorite stories in your book is something that we folks in the New York area can relate to, and it's the story of the can opener, a bridge in Durham, North Carolina,
Yeah,
that was not tall enough to let all the trucks pass under. Hence, they lose their tops when trying to get through. They get can opened.
yeah, exactly.
We have that in the New York City area all the time
uh,
because we have the old, not before the super highways, we had the parkways, and they have
yeah,
overpasses that are not big enough to allow a truck to get in. And the
absolutely.
interesting part about this is that, and you mentioned this in your book, is that no matter how much signage they put up on the roads, trucks still, they just ignore them, don't see them, whatever. And that's what
Totally.
happened with the can opener, right?
Yeah, this bridge in Durham, New York, or sorry, this bridge in Durham, North Carolina was like a real problem, because it was just low enough that people thought they could make it, or people driving trucks thought they could make it, and it was so consistently a problem that a fellow in a nearby office building just set up a camera, and he would photograph it, he would take a video of it, and they put them up online. And if you go to like 11foot8 bridge or 11foot8.com, you can like watch videos of the tops being scraped off of trucks. And the problem was, it's really a problem of bureaucracy. So the signs didn't work. And if you kind of think about this, I think about this a lot if I'm driving a truck, or if I, like I rent a truck, or and I go through a drive-through and it says it's only like 9'8" or something like that. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what the height of this truck is. I mean, like that's like it's not a thing you sort of naturally internalize. But I would say that, but one of the things that ended up happening was, the problem is that each sort of part was owned by a different constituency. So the overpass was owned by the railroads. The area underneath the road was owned by the city, and no one could really take responsibility enough to fix it, because as you can imagine, to raise an overpass for a train, you have to actually do the grade really, really far out, and so it was cost way too much money, and there was too much like important sort of sewage underneath, to lower it. And no matter what, lower the road, and no matter what they did with the signs, it didn't work. And then finally they did raise it a little bit, and somebody took some responsibility, but it still causes problems. We were paying attention to it if it got changed at all, if it meant that there were no more accidents. But there are still
Yeah.
accidents. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
because you say in the book, when infrastructure works, it is the physical embodiment of amazing things we can make when we work together. And when it fails, it reveals the cracks in the system where we can improve.
For
And that's
sure.
exactly the kind of thing you
Yeah.
were talking about. Let me get another call. Yeah, sort of a call. Let's go to Meg Sommerfeld from Rockville, Maryland. Hi, Meg. You're up next. What is your question?
Hi, I was wondering, and thanks for taking my question. What is your favorite hidden small park or garden in a major city? And is there any particular period in history when there were more smaller parks or gardens developed in large cities in the US?
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. My favorite. This is always hard for me because I really do like um the different, like, Little Charming Park really works on me like extremely well. And one of the phenomenons here in the Bay Area, and I know that there are analogs in other places, are these things called popos. We call them. They're privately owned public spaces, and in order for somebody to enclose a space to have a building the way it is, it has to be allowed to have some public use. And so they're privately operated, but they're known to be public. And so it's they're these little tiny pockets that are sometimes in a breezeway or on a roof, and you have to like use the access of an elevator to get to it. But it's meant to operate in public, and so they have a special signage here in the Bay Area. And I like exploring those in particular because I think that this notion of what is public and what is private is worth exploring for all of us. Like that, when you don't use rights, you lose them. And if something is a public park, you should try to treat it as a public park. And I think parks in general like have a lot to show us our values. Like Tompkins Square Park in New York, it has all this metal, like metal fences everywhere. That was really designed during a period of time of unrest and a protest, and they put it up to make sure people couldn't gather. And it remains to this day. And parks are a huge representation of our value and how we trust people in public spaces. And they're fascinating to watch for that reason.
Meg, my vote goes to Savannah, Georgia. Just go to
Oh,
Savannah. There
beautiful.
are 2 dozen cute little square public parks that are beyond description. They're just so beautiful to walk through and to play around in, and
Mhm.
have incredible historical value. Let's talk about people in cities and how they're going to need to adapt, mostly in terms of climate change. What does it mean for a city to adapt, and how hard is that?
I mean, it's very hard. It's really I mean, this is a huge issue for us. I mean, mainly because, you know, a city's association with its water is a huge indicator of why a city is where it is and why it functions the way it functions. And when you have water associated with climate change, I mean, sea levels are going to rise. And like New York, for example, used to be surrounded by millions upon millions of oysters. There were oyster reefs all around the city. It was a huge part of the ecosystem. It was a huge part of the economy, even. And because of pollution and because of a little bit of overfishing, and those are gone. And the storm surges that happened during Hurricane Sandy would have been mitigated a lot by the fact that we had oyster beds there. And so the pollution causing and the climate change causing greater like extreme and weather conditions, it's going to be a huge problem with our cities. And we've destroyed enough of the natural environment that is part of the balance of extreme weather conditions that we're going to have to come up with these solutions like
Well,
artificial.
is it a top down thing or is it a bottom up solution? I mean, is it are we
It
going to look
has to
from
be
help?
top.
It has to
Yeah,
be from
it has to be
meaning the
top.
federal
It's
government
too
or somebody
big.
with
Yeah,
big bucks. Yes.
it's too big because like sea levels rising just a little bit hits those cities on the coast like tremendously, and so that's going to be one of those things that's going to be massive until the thing is solved. And I think for the most part, the types of solutions that I've seen that are most inspiring is the ones that rely on nature to recover and give a space for nature, and then build on top of that. I mean, one of the things I was most sort of, I think one of the only silver linings during the COVID pandemic was the sort of shutdown of normal processes, allowing like people to see mountains outside of cities in India for the first time because the pollution was so low, and things like that. And there is a space for recovery when we allow it that space, but we're going to have to sort of harness the way that nature balances some of these extreme environmental responses and do
Mhm.
massive structural things to make this work.
Of course, the pandemic has really turned everything we know
Yeah.
about how we live in cities upside down. Upside down. Do you think we're going to have permanent structures, symbols, signage, infrastructures? For example, might we see a sign about with a face mask on it now? Like you might see a stop sign. You need to wear a face mask in this spot.
Yeah.
You need to have social distancing in this spot. We'll come up with the signage.
Yeah.
Ventilation systems changing, elevators, staircases, all that kind of stuff.
I think ventilation will be a huge one. I think that there'll be a focus on making ventilation. I think it'll be a huge focus on making spaces in homes more versatile because, like, I record podcasts in my home. My kids are in the next room doing classes, and we need more walls in this place. Like, and so like, if I was looking for my next house, I would be thinking about the versatility of a space. If pandemics are a part of our life to continue, and there's a lot of people that think that they might be. Elevators are the weirdest form of public transit that people don't consider public transit that I'm really kind of interested in because this is a tiny box that we're with people, and there was a real change in architecture when the Otis self-braking elevator was invented. Before the elevator was popular and safe, the top floor of a building was the worst floor. No one wanted to do that. They had to climb all these stairs, and if you were rich and you wanted the nicest place, you are on the first floor. And now, if because we have to sort of distance ourselves, if we have to wait a long time to get in an elevator, and if it takes like 15 minutes to get to the top floor might not be as desirable anymore, and the sort of value of what place you are in a building might change. Maybe buildings will be shorter. Like who knows? There's all kinds of stuff like that. The one thing that cropped up a lot, during the pandemic that I was interested in was just the markings on the floor, like the soft infrastructure, soft architecture that showed up, like where to be, how to be socially distant. I have to admit that was the one I kind of liked. I kind of like being told where to be and where the line is and things like that. Because often if you're like at a deli and everyone's like surrounding and no one knows where to do, what to go, it's nice to have a nice orderly queue. I'm a big believer in an orderly queue, and if we can use the space and the information layer on the floor to tell us where to stand, I'm all for it.
People grabbing at that pastrami. You got to be careful. Let's go to our next call. Joe Nemec from Sleepy Hollow, Illinois. I know we have Sleepy Hollow in New York. Didn't know we had it in Illinois. Hi, Joe.
Hi, how you doing? It's great to talk to both of you. So I was wondering, in 1992, we had the Great Chicago Flood, and they had eliminated street parking in the downtown area temporarily. It never really came back that way and really changed the landscape and the way the downtown worked. Just wondering, how often do events like that restructure the way a city changes?
Well, they certainly can. And one of the things that is just like that's pretty common is like once you give somebody access to something, it's hard to take it away. And I think that that's going to be another thing about the pandemic, which is going to be really interesting because we're experimenting with our relationship with roads for the first time in like 100 years. I mean, roads, weren't just the domain of cars for most of their existence. Like roads served all kinds of constituencies, like including trolley cars, and there were automobiles on them like about 100 years ago. There were automobiles, trolley cars, people, horses, all kinds of things. And then we just gave them over to cars. And now that we need socially distant space outside, more cities are experimenting with the idea of having cafes like extend out into the road and close down roads for periods of time just for restaurants, and make little parks and make little places where we can gather, because we do need to be together even if we're being safe and being apart. And I think that this next phase of experimenting with how we use city space and how we prioritize more like park and open public space for pedestrians over cars will be a really interesting time. And we've seen this before. There were experiments in Bogota in the 60s and 70s that led to like things that led to people basically taking over streets for periods of times. And in Barcelona there are all kinds of experiments in the 90s to make a safer space of these super blocks where only the outside was available to cars and the inside was all used for pedestrians. And I think that experimentation will continue, especially in the current moment.
Do you think that, though, for this all to work, that people have to buy in to the changes? They have to agree that these are useful. They'll have to be politically active to get their
Yeah.
representatives to spend the money on it.
Yeah, I think so. I think we learned that you don't necessarily have to spend a ton of money on it. Like in Times Square, you could start by putting out some folding chairs and then have people like begin to take it. And then it becomes codified, and then it becomes like habit. And then, and then people have the strength and political wherewithal to make it a rule. But I think that what I would love to see is that cities sort of borrow from the guerrilla activists that sort of mess with this sort of infrastructure and play with it a little bit by making pocket parks and making parklets, and they use that to try things out. And when they do, and when their constituency likes it, and I think that people will find that they have the force and the ability to make some of that permanent. But also, maybe permanent isn't the most important thing. Just being nimble and reactive is worth it. And I think the magnitude of what is happening here with COVID gives people the will. Like you become a little bit sort of unanchored from the norm, and it allows people some freedom to experiment and try stuff out. And it'll be interesting to see what sticks.
You have an episode in your book that illustrates the top-down approach versus the bottom-up approach, and how sometimes they can conflict with each other. And I'm talking about the Shade in Los Angeles story that talks about these ideas. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, shade is an interesting thing that we don't think about as a resource, but in a place like Los Angeles, where it's getting hotter and hotter, having shade is really an issue of equity. The places that don't have shade, don't have trees, don't have coverings for waiting for buses, in a place where it can be 100 degrees on a pretty regular basis, makes them pretty unlivable. And so there's often an effort for like a local merchant who has a bus stop in front of their place will create an awning, but then those awnings don't adhere to ADA guidelines on a sidewalk. They block part of the sidewalk, and they can be taken down for those reasons. And they just don't know what the guideline is, and they don't mean any harm. But you often have to balance a lot of people's needs when you are a city, and when you're one individual who is trying to create the thing that they want. You don't know all those regulations or why they're doing the things they are. So there's often the balance, or a sort of a battle of people trying to create shade, and then city taking it down, and then some of it staying, and then and I think that shade is one of those things that in terms of equity is something to look at that in a way that I never really thought of before.
I think we have time for one more question from Wendy. Is it Fuhr? Excuse me if I'm getting it wrong. Wendy, hi. Welcome to Science Friday.
Can you hear me? Hi. It wasn't a question, actually. It was really, I work for the New York City Department of Transportation. So you can just imagine every time I hear things, it's like, no, that's right. No, that's right. Or that's wrong or whatever. But if I'm not correct, some of those fences that you just talked about were initiative of the Department of Parks to take them down. So I think, yeah, I
Great.
just wanted to say that to you as well. And otherwise, I think it's great what you're doing. And I appreciate anybody looking at infrastructure in a very thorough and sort of positive way.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think that this sort of period of time for public transit is going to be really interesting for us because, I think that we're reaching this moment where I think our collective feeling was that we were turning to public transit a little bit more, and to watch it, the BART ridership here in the Bay Area has gone down 90% because of COVID and the changes in commutes. And I hope, and my hope is that the resiliency of cities, and all the things that we do when we get together and solve problems of living together is it will just be there like it has been for for as long as we've had cities. They're pretty resilient organisms, and public transit is a huge part of what makes it work for us, and I hope that people don't give up on it. So
Well, we have run out of time, like we say, like you say, in our broadcasting and radio. Thank you, Roman. Roman Mars is the host of the podcast 99 Invisible and co-author of the book, The 99 Invisible City, a field guide to the hidden world of everyday design. If you care at all about what's around you, you'll get this book and match up the things. It answers all kinds of questions I had about things I've been wondering about for years. So, Roman, thank you for your work and thank you for the book. It's been terrific.
thank you so much. I had a pleasure being here.
And you can watch the entire video of this interview and sign up to find out about sitting in on a future Zoom interview. It's up there on our website at sciencefriday.com/events. And if you missed any part of the program, you'd like to hear it again, subscribe to our podcast or ask your smart speaker to play Science Friday. And we have a new Science Friday Vox Pop app for you. As we near the end of the year, we want to know what Science Friday stories impacted you the most this year. Yeah. What stories impacted you the most? Please tell us about it on our Science Friday Vox Pop app, wherever you get your apps. And you can always say hello to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all kinds of social media, or you can email us the old-fashioned way, scifry@sciencefriday.com. Send us your feedback. Tell us what you'd like us to cover. If we don't talk to you before Thanksgiving, have a great holiday next week. We'll see you next week. I'm Ira Flato.